It just struck me.
I think there's a deep underlying call to a new martyrdom.
Yeah,
right.
In Christianity, and I think I think John McComber and those guys are feeling something of that.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I think I think God is calling us back to a new martyrdom.
Can you just expand?
Elaborate?
Well, I don't know what it means.
It might not.
I don't know what it means because I can feel it. There's a, and I don't know what that martyrdom will look like, but it's a. In many kind of ways, I wonder if it's a death to seeing the world as everyone else does, and that will lead to confrontation. That will inevitably lead to a confrontation with people that we're around. But it's in that confrontation that we hold our ground, that the world is not what they think it is, and it's actually what Christianity says it is.
Kia ora koutou, welcome to Lunch on the Way. I'm Joey, joined by Jonathan and Graham, and we're back.
We're back.
We're back.
Wow, that went quick.
Welcome to welcome to 2024.
I could have got used to that.
Yeah, that's right.
You could have got used to
I
it.
never sleep in, but I was sleeping into 8:30, and I thought, because I came home Sunday,
right,
and I thought to myself, oh my goodness, I got work tomorrow. I might even put off alarm. I didn't. I woke up at the right time, but because the whole holiday mood is postured me in a different way.
Yeah. Well, online it's just a click away.
It is.
Yep.
We're just a click away.
Simply slid over.
Yep.
So,
even though we hadn't posted in like a month or so, people are still listening.
Oh, cool.
Come on.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you what, you get a listen here and there.
Wow.
Yeah, and I'm like, people are listening to the old stuff.
Yeah, that's 23 now. 2023, it's gone.
It's outdated.
I don't believe any of that anymore.
No. But can you believe it? This is the start of season 3.
Wow.
This is season 3.
That's right. We're over the hump season, which is season 2.
Because we started in 22.
Yeah.
Third album, this is where we start to reinvent ourselves.
Yes.
It's great.
We discover our sound.
Yeah, that's right. We've discovered our sound.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Radiohead would be making Kid A at this time. It's awesome, man.
That's a very dated reference for me.
Is it?
I
was showing your age.
I wasn't into Radiohead.
Oh, okay. What else can I say?
Bon
Iver would be making
I started
22 a million.
No.
Dated again? Still too dated?
No,
crap.
I know Bon Iver. Yeah. No, I was the age that I became not aware of music, but I became into music beyond just like stuff that my parents were listening to.
Yeah.
Was probably around the early 2000s.
Okay.
And so My Chemical Romance.
Oh, okay.
That kind of stuff. The pop punk.
Okay, yeah.
Scene is, and then the Christian version is Relient K.
Relient K. Yeah.
And I was like, oh my goodness, music isn't real. And then where were you, Graham?
Well, I had a rather benign sort of existence with music because, remember I'm in a different era and it might be weird and strange to you. But
sure, you couldn't even go bowling.
Growing up in the 70s, kind of late 70s and, really 70s, which all the good music was.
Yeah.
It was all evil.
Oh yeah, true.
You would say that.
That's right.
Rage,
Backmasking.
So in the kind of tradition I was, which is a holiness tradition, you did not listen to that
is
stuff.
That right?
It's bad.
Yeah.
Which I felt robbed actually because I was quite naive as to. It was more my discovery later on of all good music.
Yeah. Is that the holiness movement? Is that
it has something to do. So in Pentecostalism, you have a theme of holiness.
Okay.
And that's gone.
It's
disappeared, and I think what kind of replaced it was a sort of more pragmatism towards what became. Church growth movement became a kind of point of defining identity point.
I feel because I mean I think I was in the Pentecostal movement for a little while, and I think I caught the tail end of that. But everyone was starting to take up smoking and drinking and getting back to alcohol again. No, it's okay, it's okay.
You wouldn't drink. You wouldn't drink,
right? Okay.
Well, mind you, and then there's all kind of conservative evangelicalism sitting there.
Yes.
So I grew up with smoking.
Yeah.
Long hair.
Yeah.
Drinking.
All that was bad.
Races. Wrong.
Wow.
Even going to a pub, you wouldn't go walk into a pub.
You wouldn't do it, yeah.
No, but here in New Zealand it'd be quite different to the UK. Pubs just a social space.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Here in New Zealand, pubs were considered.
Man, that's so interesting.
Yeah. My friends couldn't even play the Pokemon games because it referred to evolution.
Oh, wow.
What?
Okay.
No, that wasn't.
That was intense. And I was like, well, you're missing out. Pokemon's awesome, guys.
I mean, it's such a different world. It is such a different world. You know?
Oh, wow. That's so funny.
Yeah, I came out of that tradition too. And then I'd say back in Canada, it's a similar thing where it came out of fashion, holiness conversations within churches. And
what you could wear?
Not what you could wear as much as back in the day was what you did.
Right.
But now it's not even it's theologically it's in conversation, but the legalistic bent is gone.
Mm-hmm.
Of you couldn't play cards.
Right.
You couldn't go bowling. You couldn't go to the movies. This is like back in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, cards. Cards weren't wrong in my family, but they were wrong. So
playing
cards.
Go fish.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
You know, like playing crazy
like last card, no last
that.
card. Poker would definitely.
Oh,
be
dude.
Yeah.
That's like.
Are you insane?
You've lost your salvation at that
yeah.
point.
Right. Okay. Wow.
Which is ironic because the youth group my wife attended had poker tournaments.
No way.
Yeah,
Everybody did it, you know.
Yeah.
It just didn't. It was It's a really strange. When I think about it now, it's quite a strange, awkward cultural blip, really.
Yeah. Okay.
It is. It is a weird blip. I think it's a church culture trying to define itself against culture.
Yeah.
And then the blowback of that is the swing of the pendulum. Is then let's embrace culture to relate to culture.
Yep.
Yeah.
To reach people.
Yeah.
And then
right.
what we're doing now is we're in this weird space at the moment, I think, as a broad church in the West, where it's like, okay, maybe that experiment of embracing culture wasn't good, because we have a lot of compromised pastors and people in the pews who have fallen from grace in different ways because of exposure like that.
Yeah.
So what should we do now? We know we can't go back to the legalistic, don't do this, don't do do that. But we also need to be weary.
Do you think it's come back in, do you think it's come back in the return to rules of life and the return of like...
Mr. Comer?
Yeah, John McComber kind of stuff.
One.
Like because there's a lot of holiness around that kind of stuff.
100%.
And a lot of kind of like here's a new way of.
And that's what I think is always
being in the world, but not being of the world.
Is real careful that we don't, that
it can tip.
That becomes the point of so it works back to where we come from.
Right.
And I because I thought about that. The practices are really important, but my Pentecostalism flows out as the Spirit gives life.
Yeah.
So. It's, I know that sounds a bit vague.
Yeah, no, I know
but
what
it's
you mean.
the danger is you can end up with all these rule of life.
Yeah.
And it's cold.
Yeah, interesting.
So, hey, we're just gonna go for it. Yeah. To launch off of that, I was listening.
What else is happening?
I was listening to a podcast this morning. From time to time, I listen to this guy Kerry Newhoff.
He's coming to New Zealand.
He's coming. I saw his tickets.
You gonna go?
They're like $130.
Oh,
who is he?
Anyway, he used to be a Presbyterian pastor, went non-denominational back in the early 2000s, and then he pivoted from being a pastor to being more of like a church leadership person. And he has really good content and really practical stuff. It's super helpful. I found it really helpful, his podcast and his books and his articles in 2015 when I started pastoring, because I didn't know what I was doing. I was like, well, he probably does. And then I kind of stopped listening to him a little bit because I found that his content was so leadership driven that it didn't kind of resonate with where I was at in near the 2020s. And then I just started listening to him again because he's doing a lot more church trend stuff and things that he's observing and bringing experts who do data research and stuff like that, which I find really interesting. Anyway, so he had on, there's 2 points of discussion I think I want to bring up today. We'll start with the second one because we've already connected into it. He had John Mark Comer on this week as that he posted. And
he's got a new book out, eh?
He's got a new book out, and that's why he's on the podcast.
Yeah.
And I was fascinated by a statement that John Mark Comer made, and I don't think it's untrue, and I think I resonate with it to a certain extent, but I wonder if I shouldn't resonate with it.
Okay.
So this is a paraphrase of what he said. He basically said that he's not beyond, the contemporary worship service on a Sunday morning in America, which is, worship centric through music, and then the word centric, which is more of an inspirational, peppy kind of message. He says he doesn't really, it's not like he's 25 or 20 years old anymore. He doesn't really resonate with that stuff anymore because he feels like God needs to do a deeper work within him. And so his reasons for going to church or being a part of a fellowship are really different. And I at first I was like, yeah, I kind of get that, because I'm like, well, when was the last time I've listened to a sermon that like hit me to my core? Because if it was a purely content-driven sermon. I'm like, I know a lot of things now. I've been attending church not only for, what am I, 31, for about 16 years, or 17 years. Oh my gosh, more than more than half of my life. But yeah, I'm educated, master's degree, and then so I'm like, why do I go to what does the sermon do? If I were thinking about that, like, what is it supposed to do? If he's making a critique of that, and he's critiquing more the methodology behind the Sunday morning in the U.S., and I would say here as well, what should it do? Mm-hmm. For somebody who's potentially learned, has degrees, knows the Bible better than the average person, and so they're going through the parable of the seed of the sower. It's like, oh, I've heard that one before. I know all the points you're going to go to. What's the place of the sermon for discipleship? If you feel like at some point in your age of attending church you've heard it all, what's the point? Mm-hmm. That's my question to you guys, if you want to pick it up.
Yeah.
What's the point to you, Graham? Because you're the oldest here. What's your relationship?
I have my own kind of, like, when I was pastoring, you obviously think a lot about the preaching, and this is on reflection as well, that I kind of see this as the preaching as evoking questions for the community to encourage them into conversation. So what does that mean for the sermon? So the sermon is opening up the text, but not completely closing the story, but opening up the story, which actually gets the congregation in talking about it. Mm-hmm. So I don't think it's just like here's information and content, go away and do it. I would rather see it as a kind of part of a process.
Yeah.
Don't know if that makes sense to you.
It makes
sense.
That
has a whole philosophy to it too. So then what does that look like?
But there was a switch that happened, at least where I'm from, with the sermon, and where it shifted focus to where I think John Mark Comer was critiquing it a little bit. Where before the 2010s, I would say, this is a rough estimate of time, the sermons were all response-driven. It's like there needs to be a response, like not just a response in your lifestyle tomorrow. That would be good too, but even like an altar call response, at least in Atlantic Canada where I'm from. And then I noticed the language started changing around 2010 to 2015, where it was no longer a sermon anymore, it was a teaching.
Yeah.
They specifically used the word teaching, these different pastors of larger churches. And it's like, oh, he's the teacher. He's teaching. And at first, when I didn't know a lot, I was like, oh, that's great. Oh, cool. I never saw the story of, Noah like that before. That's interesting. And then now I'm just like, I don't want any more teaching. I'm like, I don't want any more teaching. I want the response. Can we go back to the response, please? I'm like, I don't want 5, to be honest, I don't want 5 tips to parent my child better when I go to church on Sunday morning. I'm like, I can go read a book on that of somebody who's actually a psychological expert. Mm-hmm. I'm like, I can listen to a podcast. I'm like, that's not what a sermon is anymore, to me at least. So what is it? What do you think, Jonathan?
Yeah, I have so much going on there. What do I think? Just on one of your points, the teaching and the sermon, I think there's room for all of that from the pulpit. I don't think it's one or the other. I think it's all of them. And and the problem is when we don't see it as opening up the Word of God and listening to it. So you can listen to the Word of God through teaching, and you can listen through preaching. So that's okay. I don't mind how it comes. And that's why it's great to have a preaching team, so there's lots of people that can feed into the preaching moment. But as soon as you move away of thinking, I'm opening up the Word of God here to hear what God is saying to us in this congregation, and you've moved it to just, I'm just here to teach the Word, rather than to listen to it, then I think you've moved out of the preaching zone, and you might as well just give a lecture.
Yeah, you might as well.
Because those are two different things, I think. So that's one of them. And the other thing I would say is I wonder if I'm kind of with John Mark Comer here.
Yep.
But I want to be really careful about being critical about what's happening in those churches.
Yes.
Because what happens when a big celebrity like John Mark Comer criticizes those things?
It has a lot of weight to it.
It has a lot of weight, and what you see is people fall away.
Yeah.
Because they almost get permission to walk away from the church at that stage. It's not giving them what they want, so they move away. So I think there needs to be some kind of construction, a constructive critique, not just a full-on critique, because otherwise you lead people back into deconstruction. So that's why I'd say to John Montgomery, you have to be super careful. What would you want to see then? Where do you think we can improve? How do we tweak this instead of just whole out slating it?
Mm-hmm.
But I wonder if below that, there's a real desire to not be cultural Christians anymore and to really connect with God. And I felt this too. Like I was just reading 1 Corinthians where Paul talks about, hey, he says to them, look, I don't come with the rhetoric. I'm not here to just talk in beautiful words. I move and I came to you in power. And I think we're missing the power of the Word of God in our churches. And we love good speakers. We love the rhetoric. We love it when it's like that. And I just don't think we're moving in power anymore. People aren't cut to the quick when they hear the Word of God. They're not thinking, I need to be holy. I need to change my life. They're like, this just fits in perfectly with what I'm already doing. And that's not the power of the gospel. It's always rubbing us back up the wrong way.
It's like sandpaper on our skin.
Yeah, that's right. So that'd be where I first jump into that.
No, that's good. What are you thinking, Graham?
Oh, I guess we try to think of just the preaching. That's the one point. Remember, communication is
exactly right.
It's back the other way. It's the congregation. So when I think about it, I'm thinking about the process, and I'm thinking about the life of the congregation. So rather than just the kind of narrative of the sermon, is the narrative, the ongoing narrative of the congregation.
That's
what
right.
is it processing? Which is what you're saying.
Yeah,
in one
that's
sense,
right.
About hearing. So then, how are we hearing the word? How are we participating in it? So what are the feedback loops for the preaching and the teaching?
Mm-hmm.
That's where I'd want to go.
Yep.
Because otherwise, you can do a really good preach, excellent communicator, but how are we thinking about that participation in that event or or space where the preaching and teaching is happening? So how are people processing it?
That's right.
So those are kind of where questions become really important.
Yep.
So I don't get what he exactly said.
Or
that part where, I was reading this morning about, and I have a kind of use an app, Pray As You Go, but it was around seed falling on the dry ground, fertile ground, and it raises a lot of questions. So and so how do you process that?
Yep.
What do you do with that as a congregation? What's God saying to us as a people?
Yep.
Yeah. So I'm not sure we think about much about that. So I'm always thinking about the ecology.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe this feeds into a little bit, but you can pull us back, Joey, is that over the holidays I went to two different churches.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I thought first of all, I got invited to a friend of mine. He runs a home church, so just out of his home. So, super interesting, really small. There's a couple of kind of para churches home churches that are around that. And so there was about 20 people at the most in the lounge.
Is that including children?
No, not including children, but there was a lot of children as well.
Is that in your area?
In my area?
Yeah, I know, because I got friends to go there.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah. Graham, did you meet Graham?
Yeah, Graham, mate. Yeah. He's a lovely guy.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed it. Yeah. I thought it was fantastic. It was so different than my experience of church has been over the past couple of years, which has been fantastic too. I'm not knocking that, but I just really loved the different way that people are doing church. So meeting together, reading out of the Bible, and just simply together reflecting on it.
Yeah.
And led by the pastor, the guy who's the pastor, who who's educated as well, but they're there to listen to the Word of God and to see how it's developing in their lives, where it pushes back on their lives, where they can see it working in their lives, and then they shared stories of what God's doing. So it's like a home group, really, but it's church for them on Sunday morning.
Yeah.
So that was fantastic, and this is where the way that I usually do worship is a band up the front. And I stand there and look at the band, and the band does their thing. The way that they did it in this church, they put a song from YouTube on the TV
lyrics,
and they just everyone watched it or sung along to it.
Yeah,
it was
man.
super low key, and I was like, it's just as valid.
That's what a youth group I interned at did. I was like, oh, you could do that?
Yeah,
like,
exactly. Yeah, you can do that. And it's.
like,
I think that was the paradigm shift. I'm like, oh, you can do that?
Yeah.
So they
And
did it
it's
to a
just as-
YouTube,
just as
to
valid.
a U2 song.
No, it was just on YouTube.
Not
like
you.
a,
Not you too.
Oh, I was thinking,
Sorry,
okay.
not YouTube. Yeah, YouTube. So that and
YouTube.
someone just
We
yeah.
might be not Orthodox anymore.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
was-
So-
Well,
say-
this is funny you say that because
Yeah.
the other church I went to the week after that
All
is
right.
the Greek Orthodox Church.
Oh, I really want to go to one.
Yeah,
of those.
so I
Okay.
went-
very different high church scenario, isn't it?
Very different, and
Yeah.
and again, a very valid way of doing church,
Yeah.
and it was
Do tell.
it was
What-
it was amazing. It
Yeah,
was,
tell us
it was
about
awesome. So the service was 2.5 hours long,
What? Oh,
and you stand for the whole time.
Oh, sorry.
Yep.
Stand.
Yeah. Everything. Now here again. I get back to what John Mark Comer I think is getting at.
How many old people are there, man?
Man, and people were outdoing me. Man, I had to sit down.
Your knees were giving out. weren't
Yeah,
they?
my knees were
Oh,
giving
my
out.
goodness.
It was, and so yeah, and I was really. It was really interesting because it wasn't just Greek people. There was a lot of nationalities. There was a lot of age groups, and there was kids there too. There's nothing for
Wow.
the kids. They are in there for 2.5 hours.
Was it noisy?
Nope.
Those
But
kids?
there's so
So
much.
what are you doing standing?
There's
What
so much going on.
Well, like
The
what?
priests are always moving around, doing stuff. People are. You can walk around if you want to. So you're not stuck to your chair. You can move if you want to. But the whole service is chanted.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it's all- it's-
participatory.
Yep, it's all chanted.
Yeah.
You
Oh, wow.
don't hardly do anything.
What?
In fact, what you do as a person in the pews is a lot of signs of the cross, a lot of crossing yourself,
So the kids are doing it too because
Yep.
yeah.
kissing
really? Okay,
icons.
so this is really
a
body-
lot of bowing.
Well, this is a lot of body interaction.
That's the
It's
same
all
as
about.
like,
It's all about. But the whole thing is about the body because there's a lot of incense, a lot of lighting candles.
The sign
So
of-
yeah, a lot going on.
the sign of the cross reminds me of like kids' action songs at church.
Right.
And I'm like,
yeah.
hey, it's less peppy.
Yeah, and around the whole building is just covered in.
Did you take your
icons.
family?
No, I didn't. I knew that it wouldn't be right for them. It'd
No.
be complete
It'd
culture
be
shock.
yeah.
But the whole service is scripture.
So is this the
And the
one
whole
down?
service is chanted.
Is this
It's
the one,
amazing.
Is this the one in Mount Albert, sort of singing in robes area?
No, it's on the way to St. Luke's if you get off the motorway.
Oh, yeah.
northwestern.
That's what
is
I
that-
mean.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So if you were to like planning center the thing and like have an order of service,
Well, you know what?
you would say there'd be like 150 different elements of the service.
Yeah, there's a heap.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like, oh,
Hu-
this scripture,
like,
that scripture.
Lots of deep reading of the Psalms. Like you read whole chapters.
Dang.
You sing the creed is chanted.
How
there's-
did it sound? Can you give it
It
a
was
go?
pretty. Oh man, I can't do it. I can't do it. But it was really cool. It was a real experience.
The Lord is
Yeah,
my
that kind of stuff.
shepherd.
Yeah.
Like that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So in Greek and in Hebrew. I mean, in Greek and in English.
Exousia,
Yeah, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And
But not Latin.
What was the 2 hours
No,
quick
sorry.
for you? Or
Oh no, it started to get pretty long.
I did it.
Yeah, but even that at that stage, that's part of it. I think.
Oh yeah.
The,
Well,
the,
I mean,
the kind of like
yeah,
this
my
feels- this
my
feels
Catholic
long.
friend talks to me about going to mass. He
Yeah.
said, and you don't even understand. He likes going to a mass where it's in Latin.
Yeah,
I said,
right.
what do you mean? He said,
Yeah.
oh, he said, you just your mind and everything's so sensory
Yeah.
that you're thinking that it's just how your mind's processing. But
Yeah.
he said it's there's a whole lot of other bits and pieces
There's a
going
whole
on.
lot going on.
Yeah.
The amazing thing part of it was that the church that the way that I do church that I'm typically, I understand, I feel in control of. I get it. It feels very
Yeah.
similar to my normal kind of day life. When you go to that, you feel caught up in something that's bigger than yourself. That's very interesting.
That's what McLuhan
And
calls the anti-environment.
Yeah, it is an anti-environment. It really feels like that.
So you kind of
Yeah.
you come out into a completely different
yeah.
place.
Yeah, and you got to choose. You got to choose to walk into it.
Yeah.
Like you're there for 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
What'd you
It's-
feel?
it's intense.
What was like? What would you consider the culmination of the service? Did it feel like everything was building to something?
Yeah, it builds to the Eucharist.
There was a table. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Well, not
And can
a
you
table.
take the Eucharist?
No, not a
There's
table.
no table.
Can you
What is
take
it?
I can't take it
because you're
No.
not part of that?
That's right. You have to be
church.
baptized into the
Okay.
Orthodox Church.
What'd you feel afterwards though? Like, what was your sense of life.
Yeah,
of reality after a 2.5 hour long Greek Orthodox service.
It's hard to know. I don't know. Maybe. Yeah, I don't know. I'm still kind of processing it.
You're
I'm still
caught up.
Yeah. What interests me is that it's through the material world that you come into contact with God. Everything's sacramental. The way that you eat the bread there, the way that you
so how
light
would you
candles.
Eat the bread?
Well, I mean, they would afterwards. They have a loaf, right?
Yeah.
That's the Eucharist loaf. Half of it goes into the cup that they then give to the congregation, and the other half is the blessed bread by the priest.
Yeah.
Who just hands it out to everyone afterwards, like it's blessed bread.
It's his food.
Oh.
It's food.
As in food.
There's a woman that came in halfway through the service, and she was from Canada. She must have been Orthodox. She's like, "Is there any holy water here? I just need some holy water." And the people are like, "Yeah, it's at the front." She got some holy water and just left. Like they just have a whole different.
Yeah.
The paradigm's so different about how and it made me think. I don't think we're living in the same world. Like that's what I felt like. I was like, they have a completely different scaffolding to what they think is happening in this world than to what I do.
Yeah.
To me, the world is just. I realized how scientific I am in the worst. In the
how
worst
Protestant
sense,
you are,
and how Protestant I am. Exactly.
They never had a Protestant Reformation.
They didn't.
No.
And I'm thinking, I'm just standing there going, we're all Christians here.
Yeah.
But they're living in to me, it feels like a deeper Christian world than I am. I felt like I was standing on the front porch and they were in the house. And I was like, wow.
This kind of reminds me of just
wow.
Just how, if I could just deviate with I had a number of conversations when I'm away, just sort of dips in the face. One guy, as we're packing our stuff up to, go home, was this Maori guy, and his partner was a Slovakian. Anyway, he engaged. I helped him the day before move his caravan. Anyway, we started talking, and he said to me, he got onto sort of what I did, and that opened up a conversation. He said, "Look," he says, I'm not a faith person, but I have growing deep respect for faith." And then we got onto this thing about just how place was so significant. He said, "I'm Maori. I'm 53% Maori." But he said, "I've got Scottish blood." And he said, "We recently went to Scotland." And he said, "I just couldn't believe what happened to me."
Right, yeah.
And I'm going,
yep.
This is what we talked about previous time. The significance of the material world
right, yeah.
in terms of our own spirituality and sense of being.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And that's he wasn't.
But he's feeling that, right?
Yeah,
he's feeling that desire.
So then with that felt thing that he experienced, and I think all of us have experienced at one point or another, that's not well represented or caught up in Catholic Protestant, or I wouldn't even say Catholic, post-Protestant kind of understanding of not just theology but reality itself. Mm-hmm. Yep. Where you're saying in the Greek Orthodox experience that you just had, you're like, oh my gosh, they're seeing the world very differently, and it's explicit.
Yeah, that's
it's
right.
Like it's in the liturgy of like how they're viewing the world.
Yep. And there's so much more that goes around it, and I think this is what is missing from our Protestant churches, is that you could only take the Eucharist if you had prepared yourself to take the Eucharist. So your whole life spins out of that divine liturgy.
Yeah.
What happens on a Sunday, everything revolves around that. And it even spreads out into your normal life. You fast on these days, you do your prayer readings and stuff like that. So in many kind of ways, what I'm hearing from John Mark Comer is a desire to live in a truly Christian world. That's what I feel like he's rubbing up against. Yeah. He's sick of living in the corporate world, or he's sick of living in sick of living in this kind of scientific world where everything is so everything is so devoid of the enchantment of the world. Do you know what I mean? And he's that's what it sounds like to me. But the danger is I don't know if the theology that he has, the way that is rich enough to fully embrace what he is after. And the reason I say that is because I feel
you don't,
because I walk into an Orthodox church and I think, man, like this is rich, but I can't get. I've struggled to come to it with the structures of the church that I know. But there's no way that would happen.
Here's a question:
I can't see it.
How long would you have to be a part of that rhythm of life to begin to see it.
I don't know, man.
Yeah, that's the thing, man. It's just like, because you said, we've had conversations in the past where it's like, belief isn't just belief in something intellectual. It's actually a practice that you take on.
That's exactly right.
Belief is doing.
And this is, I think, comes back to the sermon, what you're talking about the sermon. I mean, the critique from Greek Orthodoxy was that the Protestants and Catholics as well, you're far too intellectual. Like, everything rides on it, your rationalism. Do I have right belief? Because that's what truly saved me. And they're saying, no, do you have right practice? Because what you do every day is who you are. It's not about what you believe. It's about what you are doing in the world. It's the way that you're living that will save you.
Can I pivot?
You know what I mean? I mean, Jesus will save you. That's not what I'm saying.
No.
It's the way that your salvation is worked out in the way that you live.
Yep. Yeah,
not in what.
That's
not
what
in
Paul
what
said.
Your salvation
Work
is not
out
worked
your
out
salvation with fear and trembling.
in the way that isn't in your right thinking.
Yeah. When we read that passage as Protestants that Paul writes, where it's work your salvation out with fear and trembling, we think, we need to like really try and believe this stuff and work it out
That's
intellectually and wrestle with it in our minds and in community. Yeah, sure, but do it. Like
Exactly,
live
do
it. Live out the promise of salvation with fear and trembling, like in the fear of God and moving forward.
That's exactly right. And do you know what? The little homily that was given, because in the Orthodox service, the priest spoke for less than 5 minutes. The rest was all scripture, sung scripture. So he spoke for less than 5 minutes, and what his sermon was on, whatever, if you can call it a sermon.
His thought.
Yep, he just got up there, just off the top of his head. He said, you know what, it's not what, this is exactly what he said. It is what you do that matters. You are saved in order to do good works, but it's in the doing of the works that you know that you're working out your salvation.
Is that really what he said?
Yep.
Wow.
And that really struck me. I think that's kind of the distilledness of Greek Orthodoxy.
Yeah.
And then you go back and you read James and you read Paul, and it's not you're saved in order to do good works. And that's what and then so can I just also say this, is that over the holiday break I read Tom Holland's Dominion.
Oh, did you? Oh, yeah.
Which is, I highly recommend. It's a
I got
fantastic
it.
book.
Yeah, I've read
and
it.
do you know what changed the world? The
Jesus.
way that the way that the Christians acted in the world by going and picking up babies off rubbish heaps.
Yeah, it wasn't what they believed; it was how they worked out with their belief.
It's how it's both, right?
Well, it's because both are the same thing. It's the same thing.
It's both.
Yeah.
But we put a lot of weight on the sermon.
Yeah.
If we can just get people thinking in the right way, where the Greek Orthodox is like, if we can just get people acting in the right way, then they'll come to the right they'll understand.
They'll get it.
They'll get it.
Do you think this is part of...
So,
I mean,
that's really basic.
Do you think this is sort of part of the Protestant thing and, sort of Latin Church, of we've kind of broken apart the sort of object-subject thing, So So we don't see a thing together, so... So the idea is sort of separate to the practice.
Yep.
And so idea leads to practice.
Yep.
We're not seeing it as a joint thing. And then because we do that, we sort of the world is not sacred in one sense.
That's right.
It's just an object.
That's right. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, we'll get around to doing that stuff once we've figured it all out.
Yeah.
It's like, you're not going to figure it all out. Man.
No, you're not. You're not going to figure it out.
And you're certainly not going to understand it deeply.
Because here's another thing: is that in the making, in the doing, is revelation.
That's right,
isn't it? Yep. You're not going to
like you awaken to life.
Yep.
To Christian life in your making.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's like learning to surf.
Yeah.
The only way to learn to surf is to get in the water and try and stand up.
You can,
but in doing that, you realize you get all the nuances. You realize that you can't. You need to find your balance in this kind of way and that kind of way, and that then allows you to think more deeply about what your faith is. Because in fact, if you're not out there trying it, and you're just thinking about it, you're only ever going to touch the surface of how God has redeemed the world. He's redeemed it from the inside so that we can be people that live in the way that God wants us to. But you got to try it first to find out where you're a bit awkward.
Yeah. So that's got to raise the question. How do Eastern Orthodox think about evangelism then? I mean, how do you come
you
to
don't
faith?
know. You got to ask them.
As far as I know, that's not their number one goal.
So how would you become? How would you, how do you become Christian?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question.
Yeah, fair enough, and that might be a weak point in their theology. It's easy to idealize different forms of
That's exactly
Christianity.
right too. 100%.
So
yeah.
we're having a conversation with Eastern Orthodoxy, Greek Orthodoxy, and we're like, it's amazing. They're doing such.
Yeah, I'm certainly not saying that.
No, we're not saying
that. They have their own problems.
They got their own problems,
just like we do. We've got our problems. They've got their
Yeah.
problems. Catholics got their problems. Everyone has got their problems. The grass is not greener on the other side.
No.
But I'm just saying, I think we can learn from each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I pivot a little bit?
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Totally.
I think this kind of connects in a little bit because you read Dominion.
Yeah.
A book about how the Western civilization / the world
Have you read it?
became what it is.
So good.
Yeah,
Looking
that's
forward
good,
to
yeah.
it. I read
It's such an easy. It's an easy read.
yeah.
Yeah, it's not
but
a
it's
hard
a
read.
profound read.
I'm excited.
That's how I'd put it.
I got it on my shelf over here. I'm going to read it soon. So I read a book surveying the early church fathers, as you both know, because I was posting it.
Yeah.
And fathers and one mother. And because, anyway, historically, men could read and write. Anyway, that's the whole thing. But I was struck by one thing, more than one thing, but one thing in particular, that shift from pre-Constantinian Christianity to post. And the author did a really good job. He said a lot of people think that the church was corrupted post-Constantine because of the emperor and whatever. And he said, I'm not buying that argument. It just shifted, it changed, and priorities changed, and people changed as a result. But there were still important things that were done post the Roman Empire embracing Christianity. So this is what he made a really clear distinction though in this book, which was amazing, I thought, and it might not be new to you. He said that pre-Constantine, the way that you showed your devotion to Christ was through martyrdom.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
He's like, that was it.
That's a good point.
And he's like, that was the litmus test of like, are you really a true disciple when push comes to shove? Will you die for your faith?
Yeah.
There were plenty of opportunities to do that.
Yeah.
And so you have like this story of Perpetua, who was 22 years
story.
old.
Yeah.
22 years old, had a child, I think a son who was maybe a year old, and she was still breastfeeding, and the child wasn't yet weaned, and she was then put into not the Colosseum, but the some arena to be fed to the wild animals, and her faith in that at 22 years old, really just beginning her life, and her willingness to die for her faith was unreal. And then God did some miraculous things in that. She didn't feel any pain after stopping feeding her child, which was good, and a bunch of other things. And she didn't even remember the pain of dying and of being hurt because God almost like gave her amnesia in that moment.
Can I pick up on that story?
Yeah.
Because that's a really interesting story because it's not told by, obviously she doesn't tell it.
She tells a little bit.
But someone's writing it
Yeah.
someone's writing about seeing her die and thing. And I think, is it Ignatius of Antioch? I think someone about that is writes about her dying in the Colosseum.
I don't think it's Ignatius of Antioch because she was in North Africa somewhere.
Okay.
Ambrose? No.
Maybe someone like that writes, whoever writes the story.
Oh, this is about 3.
She was in Carthage, I think.
Yeah.
This is about 300 or 200.
Oh, no, this is like early 200s, maybe late 100s, somewhere in there.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you got all this sort of, Polycarp. And
Yeah.
all those
No,
ones.
this is after Polycarp. He was quite early.
So again, this picks up on how Christians see the world, because someone's writing about that. So and they make this explicit. Whoever it was writing about, they make it explicit. They say everyone saw a small girl, dying in the Colosseum,
In the prime of her life.
being ripped apart by lions, and everyone thought how tragic. And he says, as a Christian, I look at that and I think that's majestic.
Yeah.
Because
that's
what
the
I
wording.
see is I see someone becoming a martyr for Christ. So they see the same thing, but they see it through different eyes. And he says that's what it is to be a Christian, to see the world in a wholly new light.
So with that being said, so that was the way that martyrdom was the way that you basically showed how Christian you were, if you will, or your devotion to Christ, your piety, if you will. Then post-Constantine, something shifts. The author describes it really well. He says the first church council after when Constantine calls everyone together to basically write the Apostles' Creed, I believe, or talk about the necessary Orthodox things of the faith. He said it was really interesting because the emperor's there in the room with the bishops from all over the Roman Empire, and all these bishops are like the most haggard dudes you can ever imagine. they have one eye,
yeah,
they have like one leg, and they're just limping around. Their skin's burned off, all because of the previous emperor.
Oh,
and then now the emperor who succeeded has called all of them back in and is dining with them at the table. So these guys are like, holy crap, what has just happened?
Yeah.
Like, this is we were being killed like 20 days ago.
Yeah.
And now we're, sorry, like a year ago, and now we're not. Anyway, so they had to redefine, what does it mean to be a real Christian?
Yeah.
When push comes to shove, what does it mean? And instead of martyrdom, because that wasn't a reality anymore, at least until you were on the fringes of the empire, where the barbarians or the Irish were or whatever.
Yeah. Until the new emperor came.
Into the new emperor. Well, exactly.
He was a bit of a.
Anyway, so they had to realize something. They had to realize, we need to create a monastic movement,
right?
Because the real Christians are the ones who stop going along with the rhythms of life,
right?
And they actually leave society and go into a cave for 6 years.
Yep.
Or they go into a desert or sit in a pole for like 10 years. And they just pray. And I thought that was incredibly fascinating. How there was a big shift that happened.
And that shift,
show
I
what
think,
the real
is
thing was.
So interesting, mate. Yeah, it's great.
Because you think about the Desert Fathers. So what's the famous first Desert Father? So what I was going to say is not a group of people saying, we need to do this differently.
Yeah. Was it Anthony?
Yeah, Anthony of So it was more this osmosis, this sort of somehow this is not Christian. There's a kind of redefining. I wonder whether that's part of the cultural shifts that we find ourselves in. To be honest,
I think you're right.
Yeah,
because
I think you're right.
When I was growing up, to be Christian, you don't drink, you don't smoke, you don't swear.
Yeah,
those are the things, and that's all gone. And I think we're in this sort of space, So what is it? What is it to be Christian? That's a very good question.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And I think that's what we're trying to figure out.
Yeah, funny that you brought up martyrdom because I've been thinking about that.
Oh,
it
just struck me.
I think there's a deep underlying call to a new martyrdom.
Yeah,
right.
In Christianity, and I think that's stuff. I think John McComber and those guys are feeling something of that.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I think I think God is calling us back to a new martyrdom.
Can you just elaborate?
Well, I don't know what it means.
It might not.
I don't know what it means because I can feel it. There's a and I don't know what that martyrdom will look like, but it's a in many kind of ways. I wonder if it's a death to seeing the world as everyone else does, and that will lead to confrontation. That will inevitably lead to a confrontation with people that we're around, but it's in that confrontation that we hold our ground, that the world is not what they think it is, and it's actually what Christianity says it is.
Right, yeah.
And I don't know what that may lead to, true martyrdom, where we get killed for our faith, but it's certainly going to lead to a martyrdom where we look very strange.
Yeah.
Because I think we've done such a great job of blending in.
We have.
And I think we're getting to a point where we cannot do that anymore.
Yeah.
We need to stand strong on what God is saying. The
martyrdom
is.
Of reputation. Martyrdom
I think
of
it'll
worldview.
be all of that, and there will be some who are called to a martyrdom of death.
Yeah,
I think it's inevitable.
Yeah. Well, it's
that's what I'm feeling.
I don't want to talk about hot button issues in this conversation, or else it'll be unusable to post because we'll have those conversations at some point, but that's not the time right now. I don't think. But it does mean having unpopular opinions.
Yeah.
About things that are general consensus topics in culture, and it means being okay with that.
Yeah.
And taking potentially the occupational repercussions for that, or what have you. Yeah. So this will pivot to the first thing I wanted to talk about, because the second thing with John Mark Comer, the first thing is this. I was listening to still Carrie Newell's podcast because he had different guests on each episode talking about church trends, and then this person, he was the CEO of the Barna Group or something.
Barnabas.
Barna,
which is kind of reaches out to Muslims, I think.
No, not that. Barna Group is a survey group in the U.S.
Barna.
Barna Group, and they do some stuff in New Zealand as well. Basically, they just survey Christians and try to get a pulse as to what's going on.
Yeah.
And anyway, he talked about what Generation Z is kind of leaning towards, demographically speaking, with the surveys they do and stuff. And he used a phrase that I didn't like, and it's not because I didn't think he was right. It's just because I think it misrepresented other generations and literally every other generation after Christ to now.
Right.
And I think he said that the baby boomers and Gen X, they had a form of church and expression and methodology around church that was certainly more attractional and more polished and more lights and more whatever. Nothing new. We understand that. And millennials kind of adopted it, but they kind of wanted to go small and go into like the community-based ministries, like you said, small home churches and things like that. That was the bent for millennials. And then he said that Gen Z, they just want the real thing.
Right.
And they want, and how he defined the real thing from what the dad is telling him was that they want things that aren't polished, they're stripped down, more authentic. And that's certainly, if you look at general culture, that generation online, when they post content and videos and stuff, it's intentionally looks like it's not polished, right? It looks really haggard, but that's a part of the aesthetic. But one thing, when I heard they want the real thing, this new generation wants the real thing, I was thinking, didn't every generation want the real thing?
I agree. I don't think that's
right. But they want the real thing in what they consider to be authentic and real and true.
Yeah.
But I feel like every generation,
I agree,
wants what's real and true.
That's what you chase.
That's what you chase.
Do you know what's so funny? Because Tom Holland, I think, he would say this is such a Protestant move.
Yeah.
This is a Protestant move. It's the radicalness of it. They're always wanting to reform.
Mm-hmm.
So here again is another reformation.
Yeah.
So every generation reforms the last generation. No one has ever done it right.
Because it's the water we're swimming in and we can't help ourselves.
Exactly right. So this radicalness of wanting to reform is is all part of it.
Yeah.
And I wonder if in my mind, I can't, thinking about the Orthodox Church, there's been no reformation there. And the real thing for them is to be part of the history of the church.
Yeah.
And to carry on those deep, deep traditions. That's the real thing. Funny for us, that's not.
No, isn't it?
It's to reform and get back to something authentic the whole time.
Because we feel like
what is that
changed it, or
exactly.
I don't know what I don't know. What is the real thing? Like, Grant, your generation wants the real thing.
Swirling around in my head, and part of kind of
cynical.
No, because I just had this conversation yesterday, and it's sort of in the back of my head. So I must say it was. So my neighbour down the road, he comes over a bit drunk the night before, and he says we've bought a caravan. And he's like, this is fantastic thing. Anyway,
he didn't buy that when he was drunk.
He fixed up my stove. And anyway, but what he was saying was, he says that's right. Because I said, look, I've had cancer, and this is something we wanted to do.
Yeah.
But his whole view, was hedonist.
Right.
And I kind of, when he said it all, he put me in that, and I thought that's not it.
Yeah, right.
And he put you in what?
Put me in that bucket of being a hedonist.
Right. Yeah.
I get it. You've got to live I party every night and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And I just realised, and I just thought, oh my goodness. So there were a lot of tensions in me going, how would I ever share the Christian story with you?
Yeah, right.
Do you disagree with him in that moment if he's drunk?
No. Well, no, but he thought, he was drunk, but he was sober enough to have a bit of...
Yeah,
he wasn't completely.
And he
gone.
assumed that you were living. You were living the same life as he was living.
Going, no, I'm not.
Yeah,
and I'm going, how as a Christian do I have a caravan?
Yeah,
and enjoy it.
Yeah,
and be Christian. That's what I started coming to. And how does that witness to him? Because actually, what he's seeing is I'm just like all the rest of the hedonists, living my life, and I've only got this amount of years, so you've got to live out the best that you can. So you take what you can. I'm going. No.
Yeah,
and I felt this conflict, actually. I felt kind of really misunderstood.
Did you?
But then I thought, how do I tell him? Because part of me was this, again, which I kind of want to stir up in me, of how do I tell him about Christ and Christian story? And I felt kind of like, to be honest, I felt not a failure, but I didn't know what to do.
Yeah,
didn't know what to
totally.
say.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I felt this tension
Yep.
because I'm just living out of a different lens.
Yep.
I'm seeing it a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was another one, going through the last night looking at, you belong to a caravan association. And as I'm going through it, because I'm just looking for what is there, and then you go through it, and then there's the Good News Caravan Club North.
Yeah.
The Good News. And I said to Linda, "Oh, Linda, that looks like a Christian one." And then I thought to myself, why would I wouldn't want to belong to a Christian one? Because actually,
Yeah.
in one sense, to be in the world, if you're all together with Christians, then where would you be sharing your...
exactly.
So it's the lens you're seeing.
Yeah.
It's the world you're seeing.
Yeah, and then this is where I get I feel that tension too, Graham,
you?
because I've been feeling that too. But then we get back to, I have a different lens of viewing the world, but my life looks exactly exactly the same. And then I come back to, well, if my life is, if I do everything exactly the same, then I am the same.
Yeah.
Who cares what my lens is? If
That's
I'm
right.
living exactly the same life as someone who does not believe in Jesus, as say, if all my habits are the same, if all my goals are the same, then I'm living a hedonistic life as well. Surely I'm living a hedonistic life. The scaffolding of my life is no different than the scaffolding of their life.
Well, that's the
Then
part. That's the part that
how
kind
Christian am I?
Yeah, that's the part that gave me the tension
Who
because I'm
cares
going.
if I believe in Jesus?
Yeah.
Who cares? Honestly, my beliefs aren't going to save me. It's the way that I live. That's the impact of the world.
Exactly.
So that, yeah.
So I felt that.
I feel that tension too.
Yeah, I felt that tension, and I
Man.
thought,
So full on.
yeah.
I had this thought.
I haven't renounced anything.
No.
There's nothing I've renounced for the gospel.
Yeah.
Honestly, nothing.
Yeah.
So,
I just buy different books than the guy in the house next door to me.
Yeah.
Oh, dude.
I'm
sorry. I'm being real harsh on myself because
No.
that's a
part
huge
of me,
critique.
a part of me is wondering. I'm not saying be a radical.
Yeah.
Because that means something different to everybody.
Yeah.
And some people are legitimately fundamentalist radical, and
Yeah.
I'm like, no, I'm not thinking that. But a part of me is like, why does the government give us 33% of our giving back when we give to charitable organizations and churches?
Yeah.
I understand one reason is because it means that we can do the work that the government's essentially paying 1/3 for. Fair enough. I get it. But another reason is, why does the church still have that benefit?
Right.
Well, is it a cultural hang-up, or is it because we're too tame and we fit so well within the culture itself?
Well, I think this comes back to Constantine.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, this is what happens when Christianity becomes a state religion. You build it into your systems. Now, there's been good stuff about that, obviously.
Yeah.
Human rights. We try to make our organizations, fair for everyone. But on top of that as well, we treat the church, the church has been absorbed into the system.
Yep.
There's plus and minuses.
There are.
Yeah. I come back to Paul as, reading through 1st and 2nd Corinthians, and the way that he radicalizes their lives because of the gospel changes everything. He's like, stop sleeping with your slaves.
Yeah.
Pretty much he says it.
Yeah.
Stop taking advantage of their bodies.
Yeah. I'm like, wait, what? They're mine now.
In fact, stop raping them.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Because they're your brothers and sisters. Their body is now Christ's body.
Yeah.
Now that is a radicalization of how people are living in society. He changes the whole structure of their life.
Yeah.
What they thought was normal, now he radicalizes. He says that's no longer normal. And I just think of my own life, that the structure of my life is exactly the same as the world I'm living in. Where does the gospel radicalize my life, that I have to live now differently? I'm happy to think differently. No problem.
Yeah.
But am I happy to live differently?
Yeah.
Not so sure. This is where I think Paul comes, not with rhetoric, but in power.
Yeah.
Man, there's power in changing your life.
And I think that comes back to the kind of where we started about the preaching.
Yep.
How do we talk about this? When you hear the stories of Jesus and other stories, it's, as we're talking, how do I work that out?
Yeah.
Because, a little bit of
agree.
the question I've been asked this over the last couple of days is, I really like having a caravan. How do I be a Christian and have a caravan?
Yeah.
It's not wrong.
Yeah.
But what does that look like?
It's not wrong.
Yeah. And to take that one step further, I think, like, if we go to that, what's the real thing? and within the conversation that this podcast is having about trends and stuff, obviously it's a church leadership podcast, so they stay within the niche of church leadership, which I completely get.
Yeah.
But when it's like, this generation wants the real thing, it's like you're having that conversation within the paradigm of Sunday morning expression of church, and how do you evangelize people outside of church? That's the only paradigm structure with which you're having that conversation. But how you're defining it, Jonathan and Graham, what's the real thing? The real thing is looking real different to your surroundings.
Yeah.
Because of who's Lord in your life.
Yeah.
And you can believe all the right things. You can say, I think after the sermon we should have more response times than like contemplative times. Yeah. That's the real thing. I'm like, no, that doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's right.
It does matter, but it doesn't matter. Like, people should respond to things, and they should contemplate things, and they should be in conversation with others after the word is spoken, and they should, all these things are true. They should be done. But if we're talking about what's the real thing. Yeah. It's living differently as a result of who's Lord.
Yeah, that's right.
And I'm like,
that's deeply connected to deeply connected to the material world and our bodily presence in the world. Mm-hmm. That, you know what I mean? Like it's every day.
Yeah,
it's which takes a fair bit of working out.
It does. It takes a lot of working out. I think you're absolutely right. And exactly. And that's what theology should be doing.
Yeah.
It should be working that out.
Yeah.
Yeah, the conversation of theology is not over, is it? It's not done.
Well, it's dynamic.
Done.
That's right.
The Orthodox points might be done, but that's it.
And this is where you come back to the church fathers, the patristic period. Their theology is it's both incredibly speculative, like it's very intellectual, but at the same time it's incredibly practical. Is this worth dying for? How are you going to live in this? But they draw it out of this huge intellectual sphere as well. These guys aren't dumb. They're incredibly smart. But it's integrated in the life that you will then live, because these guys are getting their fingers cut off for thinking this way. They're getting their tongues ripped out for thinking this way. It's not an ivory tower theology.
No.
It is theology that is lived out through the daily life. These guys they prayed more than they thought.
Yeah.
But their thinking was praying at the same time.
And you know what?
They're integrated. And we've separated things out. You can do theology over here. You're safe to think like this.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it really how you're living. No, you got to put those two things back together.
You're right, and
you got to put them together.
You know what else? From what I got from this book was exactly what you just said came out very strongly. But what also came out was these guys cared deeply about Orthodox theology.
Oh my goodness!
They cared so much about thinking the right things about Christ.
Yes,
and absolutely. I think from our perspective, we're like, oh man, does that really matter? It's how you live. And they were like, no. If you don't understand who Jesus was properly, you will live incorrectly.
Right. That's so true. Yep.
And because they cared so much about the living, they did not tolerate somebody who said that Jesus was not really a man.
Yep.
Was completely God.
That's true too.
And then you got a church father, I forget who it was. Was it Irenaeus? No. A couple of them dealt with that issue. But he's like, he was like, I sent through a message where these guys were so intense in right theology that I think it was Nestorius, or he was a heretic.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially, I think it was Irenaeus.
Well, in fact, he was Orthodox and became a heretic. It was in the working out of those two things that they parsed out what is true orthodoxy and what is heresy. But it was was
both, he a heretic though?
He was, but that took a while of listening to each other, of discussing with each other, of debating each other, and in many kind of ways trying to kill each other. But it was so important to work that out. But so I guess what I'm trying to say is that we need to listen to each other and hold each other to account. But because we're still listening for orthodoxy.
Yeah. This is what Tertullian said.
Yeah.
When he cared so much about not only right practice, but right thought and how they integrate with each other. He said this. He said this about heretics. If they are heretics, they cannot be true Christians. They adopt the names of the heretics because they have not received from Christ what they instead pursued of their own free choice. Since they are not Christians, they have no right of access to the Christian scriptures. We are completely justified in saying to them, "Who are you? From when and where did you come? What do you have to do with me, you stranger? By what right do you have to cut down my tree, Marcion, a heretic?
Yeah.
What allows you, Valentinus, to divert my streams? What authority, Apelles, do you have to move my boundary markers? This is my land. It's not yours. So these guys were like, you're distorting who Jesus is.
Mm-hmm.
We're not even in the same room anymore.
Yeah.
We're not even in the same house.
Yeah.
You're actually off planet Earth at this point, in my opinion.
Yeah.
You have no right to talk about Christian scriptures anymore because you don't know who Jesus is.
Yeah.
And then he's saying that, because he lost, he's tongue ripped out, all this stuff. It's not like he said it because he cares about just right thought and doing and thinking the right things.
Yep.
He cares about right practice.
He does, yeah.
And the two integrate together.
They're held together.
He cared about it so much that he was willing to oppose people so intensely.
Yep.
Because he cared so much about it.
Yep.
And people did not like Tertullian because of how aggressive he was.
That's right. That's so
true. There's another story in Dominion.
Yeah.
Like there's a number of stories in the book
point.
Dominion that are really striking and challenging.
Yeah.
But one of them was about Martin.
Martin? Yeah.
I'd never heard of Martin.
No, neither had I.
So
That's
Martin
so
is a centurion in the Roman army. And apparently in France, there's a place called St. Martin's.
Yeah.
And this guy...
Heavily contested over the centuries as well. That church.
Yeah. Well, I think that was sort of where the Muslim onslaught came. And
if we can take down Martin's church, we can take down Christianity. That's what they thought.
Yeah. But so Martin, I think in a different way to Tertullian, but he just lived out Christ.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
And it's an extraordinary story the way he tells it, isn't it? I was really challenged by that.
No, that's a really good point
a really embodied character who had power, but used everything in his power in terms of so changed by Christ.
Let's bring it to an end.
Oh no, I was just.
You say last thought. You last word.
No, I just love that the Martin and Tertullian putting those two things together and how we cannot parse the right thinking away from the right practice. They have to go together, and I think our challenge going forward for Christians is to how to keep those two together. How do we come back to our right practice and right thinking? And the gospel will be challenging for us in that way. If you're up for the challenge, then get in.
That's the real thing.